Well, good morning. Hi there, Deb. Good morning,
Good
Charles.
morning.
And
How
Ken.
you doing?
I'm very
Hello,
well.
everybody. I'm not feeling too good today, but I am here to listen in.
You don't sound good, Deb. I don't know you
Yeah.
well, but I know that's not how you normally sound.
Right. Yeah. So I'm a little under the weather, but I just want to listen in today.
So if you could do what I just did, which is put in your status where you are on your journey. Good morning, Chuck. Nice to see you.
Okay. Yes, for sure.
So if you're declared or you've done your exam or where you are in your journey, that would be great. So I'll say hi to Chuck because I haven't seen you for ages.
Yeah, it's
I know.
been a little
Hi,
while.
Chuck. It's been a minute.
And it looks like Ken is trying to connect to audio.
Okay, I can hear you now.
You did it. Okay, welcome.
Yeah, I'm a little punchy today. I did a 400-mile round trip yesterday for a little photo shoot. And I'm doing a 200-mile round trip today for a photo shoot.
Well, good luck for you and thank you for joining us. So did you have anything specific you wanted to ask today before you do your journey?
No, I'm going to be here for the full hour. I just want to learn information. I'm age 70. I really like PPA and the CPP program. But at age 70, I'm not sure that I will be able to benefit that much from it just because of age-related illnesses and so on. I will not be able to go to Imaging USA just because of my health issues.
Well, I'm sorry to hear about that, but last year you had it virtually. Did you attend virtual?
Oh, I attended virtually and I loved it, especially that one about reading light. That was so informative.
Very good. I don't remember the speaker. Do you remember the name of the speaker?
It was a lady and she talked about catch light. She talked about how to read light and how you can understand how somebody took a picture and what they did. And she said, the more I learned to read light, the better photographer I was. And she was in so much detail, it blew me away. And I've taken zone system photography, Angel Adams system in film. I worked for the best lab in North America, custom color printing. And so that, you know, I've had a lot of experience and that just blew me away.
So I don't know that we have a particular agenda for today. So I'll ask Charles, do you have anything that you would like to cover?
Not at the moment. I know we had talked about the light ratio of the 3-to-1 last week, and we were to go and try it and see how it came out and whatnot. So that's, I guess that's probably the only question I would have is.
So here's something that I like. Here's something that I like to do, and it goes to both what you and Ken are talking about, which is to look at a photograph or even a video like we have now and try and figure out how the lighting was created. So when you do that, you're now starting to think in reverse, how would I make it? So Deb's icon, her avatar there, how was that lit, do you think?
I would say, I think she has 2 lights. The main light, I would say, is off to the right side of the camera. And yeah.
On your glasses, I see 3 catch lights. There's one on the left and then 2 on the right on my screen, and it looks like it's a round light.
Are you talking about me?
No, I was talking about the Charles.
Okay, right. So first of all, there's the main direction of the light, and how would you detect that?
It'll be the lightest part of the skin.
Right, and on Deb, where's the lightest part of the skin?
It's kind of right in the middle, but a little bit off to the left of her face.
Right, we've got a little bump of light on her nose, and one on her, as I'm looking on the right cheek, as we're looking, and on the flat of the forehead, but it's not specular on the forehead, so that's well controlled, so we don't have saturation. And so it's something that's probably maybe to the right and not far away from center. So the other way that I look at that is to look for shadows. So what kind of lighting do we have? What's the lighting effect? So this is a one of the, in the London and Upton books, you've got a lot of different styles of lighting. Rembrandt, where you've got the light on the cheek, where it cuts across the nose, that's the style of lighting that I'm talking about. And in Deb's case, what style of lighting do we have in her, on her image? There's a particular thing that we look for to determine the style of lighting.
I think the light is about 30 degrees to the right.
Yeah, that might be true, but I'm asking for the style, the word that describes the style of lighting.
Okay.
Butterfly?
Good morning, Nancy.
Good morning.
Yeah, so you got the idea what we're looking for. So in Deb's case, there's some specific thing. I'll give you a clue. It's under her nose, and Nancy gave us an answer. Why do you think she's wrong or right? Or do you know the word? So Ken or Charles, do you know the word butterfly lighting?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the word, yes.
Yeah, butterfly lighting would be a shadow on the nose, almost straight down, and there would be a main light and then a fill light. And I don't see any hair light because her hair is not lit up. It's just the light, main and fill that's lighting her hair.
Yeah, so at my meeting with photographers this last weekend, somebody said, let's get a hair light and go back to the 80s. So that was a style of light which was probably more popular than it is now. A lot of lighting styles these days are flare and backlit with heavy sun and kind of very atmospheric. But the studio style of the hair light, Charles, do you know how that would what that would look like if we used a hair light?
Yeah, it would come depending on which, if we're just using it straight above her head or to the right or to the left, it will highlight the hair on whichever side the light is on. Shooting
so what's another name for that kind of highlight that you're talking about?
I don't recall.
Anybody? What's the name of the light where it just highlights the outside or the top or the back of a
I've heard some people call it a garlic light, hair light, but the hair lights were usually behind the person to one side or the other, and it had either a snoot or very tight barn door on it. So all it do is hit the hair only.
So Philip, welcome. What we're talking about lighting styles, and we started off using Deb's image as an example. And Nancy had mentioned that she thought it was a butterfly lighting style because of the shadow under her nose that slightly resembles a butterfly. According to the angle of the light, it can be bigger or smaller. And in Deb's case, it's pretty small, but that's probably the case that we've got a light which is a little high and more or less centered, and it hits the nose and creates a little butterfly with wings just underneath the nose. So then we were talking about a hair light, and what I was looking for is the style of light, not the whole lighting style, but the lighting effect that we get if we have a light behind the subject.
Is it lighting that is usually slightly above and to the back, and what it does, it separates the hairline from the background,
Right.
specifically.
But what's
also
the name of that separation? What's one of the
backlight? It's not a backlight, is it?
Yeah, I was looking for the word contrast. So what we have there is a contrast so that we can identify the subject from the background.
Right.
And in Deb's case, she has a grey background and black hair. So do we think that the background was lit or not lit?
Not lit.
Not lit.
Not lit.
So I didn't know.
So how would it have got light?
Just from the main and filler coming through to
Ambient.
her.
Right, so they would have spilled onto the background. And what's the thing that what's some of the issues that we have to deal with according to how much light we want on the background if we're not lighting it directly?
It becomes too dark and there's no separation between the subject and the background.
So how would you affect that?
I would put in a background light.
Yeah, yes, but Ken, we're asking, because there is no light, how would you affect the intensity, the brightness of the background? We'll go for Nancy for 20 here.
The shutter speed, right?
Possibly. So ambient, you could bring in ambient light. Most likely this is not ambient light. So how would we affect the brightness of the background if we're just using, for instance, say we just have one light here. We've got no background light. How will we affect the brightness of the background?
So you would change the strobe,
Yeah. Okay, if we couldn't change the strobe, because it's not where I'm going, so we're not changing the strobe. How will we affect the
reflector.
possibly
reflector.
without additional equipment, just the background. We'll ask Philip, how will we affect the brightness of the background if we just have one light and we're just using the light spilling onto the background? How would we affect
We
it?
would probably decrease the f-stop on the main light.
No, we're not changing anything on the camera, and we're not changing anything on the lights themselves.
Ah.
I would say move the light back.
We're not changing anything to do about the lights themselves. How about Chuck?
There. I would say drag the shutter by going to a slower shutter speed, because that will affect the ambient light.
Yeah, but I think this is not ambient light. So I'm not, maybe it's my fault, I'm not asking the question in the right way, but the key is if you move the background further or closer to the subject, then what will happen?
It will darken or lighten the background.
Oh, so Charles, can you explain the mathematics or the arithmetic between how we would affect the background intensity just by moving it?
The closer, well, I think I would move the subject versus the background though, and move them either closer or farther away.
Well, you could move the subject, but then the subject will get closer to the light. So then you find you're actually moving the camera and the subject and the lights in order to make that intensity.
So if you move the background further away, the light will get harsher. If you move the background closer, it's more diffuse. So therefore, if you want to increase the light on the background, you'd move it further away.
So how does harshness relates to shadows? So let's avoid the shadow and just look at the intensity of the light. So if you could rephrase that.
Inverse square law.
There we
Inverse
go.
square
Right.
law.
Thank you so
So
much.
you'd have to move it closer to receive more light.
Exactly.
I know that on studio lighting, you move a light 6 inches and you've changed the exposure by 1 f-stop.
Right, so here we go. So it's the inverse square law, which means that the further away you go, light decreases at the 1 over the square. So if you move it 1 unit away, you've now got double the decrease, or one half of the light. So going to Deb, you see that she's got a gray background. So in a studio situation, you might have a middle gray backdrop. And you can actually make that backdrop brighter or darker, so you can get it to be light gray if you move it close to the light, and you can get it to be dark gray if you move it further away, and you can get it to be black if it's a long way away. So that way you can use even a white wall. You can turn a white wall to be dark or maybe even black if you've got a big enough space. So that was really the the idea. We don't think that Deb's background was lit, and so now you can adjust the background contrast between the subject and the background by moving the background closer to the light or further away. And Philip had mentioned something about the shadows. So Charles, can you tell me what will happen to the shadows the closer or further the background gets away from the subject or the light?
The closer the background is to the subject, it's going to have a harsher shadow. As you move it away from it, it kind of softens the shadows.
What determines the sharpness of what determines the sharpness of the shadow?
The light.
Well, the light certainly, but what determines the sharpness of the shadow from the light?
Where she is in relationship to the backdrop. The further away you go, the more blurred the shadow becomes, because again, you are lighting the person, and so it gets more blurred the further back you go.
So it's diffusion is what you're saying. Well, how can we get a sharp shadow from the sun? Because that's 93 million miles back.
Because it's one direction, and it's a very, very, very bright light.
Right. So the power of the light and the distance, and also the nature of the cutoff. So if you've got hair, that's a kind of a blurry thing, and if you've got the jaw, that's not in my case, but often that's a sharp subject which can be projected onto the background. If you have if we had a light with a softbox and we moved it closer to the subject, would the shadows get harsher or sharper? More contrasted, or would they get more diffuse? Which?
Soft.
Sharper.
Diffused.
Diffused.
Okay. So we've got the alternate answers there. So
the closer you get the light, the more intense the light becomes, and so the sharper the shadow would be.
Not with a softbox. No, with a softbox. So if you have a speed light, it's this big.
Right.
And if you put it in a softbox, it's big. And when you bring it closer to the subject, the light is able to wrap around the subject. So now all the
understood.
Right. And
understood.
So do you know what can anyone tell me what a beauty dish is?
It's metal, and it has a metal insert to cover with the light source, so that the light spills all over the inside of the silver part, and you don't have a harsh light.
Right.
You have a small light source. It might be a strobe or it might be a speed light, and then you often have a curved plate, and the light comes onto the curved plate, and then it gets rejected onto an even larger curved plate that's often painted white or something like that, and it gives a very even and diffuse light on your subject, so that for beauty you don't want shadows at all. Often you just want to see the details of the facial features and the makeup and that kind of thing, and you don't want to have shadows interfering. So I'm going to share my screen and look at some examples of lighting scenarios here. Can you see the lighting guide that I'm showing?
Yes.
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 Okay, great. So this is actually, there's like 24 different lighting scenarios here. But what we like to do is refer you to the London and Upton books, the books that are sanctioned or recommended by PPA, so that you have an official source of information. This is not official, but it's very useful. So I'm gonna show it to you. So here, for instance, let's look at a butterfly. So here's butterfly lighting. And just now we were looking at Deb's face. And in the center of my screen, you see the model has a kind of flat and even lighting on her forehead, down the nose. There's a little bit of shadow under the eyebrows, but not on the bottom of the eyes. It's the top that's shadowed, not the bottom. And then the nose is lit. It's not specular. We don't see a bright highlight. We do see brightness, but it's not a bright highlight. The ears are approximately the same. And then at the bottom of the nose, you've got this little butterfly or seagull shape, but it's called butterfly lighting. The top of the lip is lit. There's a shadow in the mouth under the lip, a tiny shadow underneath the bottom lip, and certainly there's a lot of shadow underneath the chin. So that lighting, it shows you here, there's one light. It could be a beauty dish or a softbox. You'll see just to the left of the face, you'll see the lighting diagram. It shows you that the light is fairly close. You see that in this particular case, the subject is quite a way away from the background. The light is much closer to her than she is to the background, maybe double the distance to the background from the subject. And the background appears dark gray. So that's similar to Deb's lighting setup. She might have had the light slightly to the right. Sometimes it's actually difficult to get the light right behind the camera because that's where you are. You can raise it up, but now as you're raising it, you're going to create other effects because the higher the light comes, the more darker the shadows go underneath anything that's protruding, the chin, the nose, the lips, the eyes. So that was butterfly lighting. So let's compare that to loop lighting, which is next to it. So here the lighting is off to one side. Excuse me. Here the lighting is off to one side. And Charles, can you tell me the differences that we're seeing between butterfly and loop lighting?
Yes, with the light being on the right side of the camera, the shadows on her face are over to the right side now.
Right. So in this particular case, we have a shadow on, as we're facing the image, the shadow is on the left side of the nose. And the loop lighting is because just under that her left nostril, as we're looking at her, so her right nostril in real life, on the left nostril, we see a little, it's called a loop, or basically it's the joining of that nose shadow from the center of the nose between the nostrils all the way around to the top of the left side of her nose, the widest expanse of the nose. So that little black, let's see if I can use my cursor. No, I can't use my cursor here, sorry. That is the loop that we're looking for. So the butterfly was directly under the nose, and the loop is on the left nostril as we're looking at the subject. And then other things that come with that, because we've moved the light to the side and we're casting shadows from anything that is protruding. So we've got a shadow in her left eye socket, again, not the lower eyelid, just the socket. And we've got a shadow down the left side of the face. In butterfly, the ears were more or less the same, but in this case, the ears are very, very different. We've got a lit ear and we've got a shaded ear, and only one side of her neck is shadowed. So we've got a lot of shape. So when we're looking at butterfly lighting, it's almost flat lighting. We'll find flat light in a moment, but it's almost flat lighting. There's very little shadow. There is some, but only a little. But when we go to loop lighting, we've got a lot of shadow. So right next to it is flat lighting. So here we are with flat lighting. Now we've used two lights here, and that's because we've basically done loop lighting on one side and then loop lighting on the other side, and all of the shadows have got canceled out. So the flat lighting, basically, we can see almost no shadows. The top of her eye socket is lit. We can see her eyelashes on the top of her eye. Again, the underside, the lower eyelid is lit. There's no shadow under the nose. There's no shadow to the left or the right. The ears are approximately the same, and even under the neck is pretty well lit. There's a tiny shadow there. So when we're looking to take portraits, for beauty applications, flat lighting or butterfly lighting are preferred because they don't highlight shape of the face. Instead, they just highlight features. So it's very glamorous. You're just looking at the eyes. There's not a lot of size to the nose, not a lot of shape, so it's diminished in its importance. The nostrils are not strongly shaded, but we can see them. And the lips, you know, if we want to highlight lipstick and gloss and liner and that kind of thing, we're going to bring out a lot of the color and not too much of the shape or texture, because all the pores get filled with light, and so they're not very obvious. So we would want to use something like flat lighting for people that have got a lot of texture. So what's an example of a demographic that we might want to use flat lighting preferentially? So Charles, when would we want to use flat lighting preferentially for what demographics? Okay, no pressure. Anybody?
Headshots,
Headshots of who?
business, men, women.
Well, not necessarily men. So for business headshots of women, that's a common thing because they want to diminish any imperfections, pores, wrinkles, that kind of thing. But for men, it's not so common.
Also, if you have a very round face, this will flatten the face so that it doesn't look quite as round.
Right, even lighting will make things look flatter, but the roundness, we're going to come to that in a moment. But going back to the headshots, for women, it's common that they like to have any defects diminished or any perceived imperfections. I think everyone is beautiful, but you know, the perceived imperfections, we want to reduce those. So more flat lighting is common in headshots, especially towards the glamour side. Or the demographic idea that I was trying to give you was for older people, flatter lighting is generally better than shaded lighting. So let's back up because I want to go to, so in your exam, you're going to come across words. And one of the things I recommend for the CPP is that you spend some time looking at the glossary. So in the references that are listed, including London and Upton, there's a glossary, and also there are flashcards on the CPP page on the website, which introduce words which you're going to need to know the meaning of, so that when you take the exam, you're not surprised by a word where you know the technique, but you just didn't know the word. Like butterfly, for instance, butterfly lighting may come up. It's a word that they might use for lighting scenarios and give you a question about it. And if you didn't know what butterfly was, but you knew about how you would light and get that shadow under the nose, you might give the wrong answer. So reading through the glossary and becoming familiar with the vocabulary, and that might introduce you to new techniques as well, but that gives you a better chance in your exam. Now let's go to split lighting. Oh no, sorry, we're going to do broad lighting. No. Do I have broad lighting? Okay, we'll start here. So broad lighting is another potential lighting scenario that we would use for portraits and headshots, but often we don't use it for women. Actually, it lights the face on one side. You can see, as opposed to loop lighting, which is in the bottom left-hand corner, you can still see the lighting diagram. The light has been moved further to the side. And because of that, we've increased the shadows on the shaded side and increased the light on the lit side. And so now the shadows have become even stronger. And you can see that compared to loop lighting in the bottom left, where we still see detail on the left side of the face, in broad lighting, and this is an exaggerated form of broad lighting, we've got almost no light at all on the left. So we've gone from a lit side of the face into a complete shadow. And so now that's highlighted the bridge of her nose. It's highlighted the little shadow under the nose there above the lips. And we've given light to one side of the face. So if you were to compare the broad lighting on the middle picture on the top and the short lighting on the left picture, short lighting we've lit from the side where the
far side of the face.
The direction where the nose is facing. So butterfly, the nose is facing the camera. Broad lighting, the nose is facing to the left, to camera left, but we've lit the right side. In short lighting, the nose is facing camera left, but we've lit the left side, we've lit the short side. And it's called short because if you were to measure the width of the face that we're showing in the broad side, in the broad image, broad lighting, we've got like 3/4 of the face. So we're showing the broad side of the face. And on the short lighting, we've lit the short side of the face, the narrow, the small portion. So what Ken was referring to about the round face, we can make a person who has a rounder or wider face look narrow just by the direction of the light and the side of the light and the direction of their nose. So they, one of the common phrases, and you'll see it in the PPA videos, which Steve Kozak talks about in the free PPA videos that he's done, or that are free to you. And he'll say, we generally don't broad light abroad. So that's an old folklore term for woman. And so if we were to broad light a woman, like the top center picture, we're going to emphasize the width of her face. And generally ladies like to appear thinner, you know, just modern times. I'm not saying that's better personally, but if the client wants to appear thinner and we do broad lighting, they're going to look at it and think, oh, you've made my face look big and wide. And that's not how I want to appear or how I imagine myself. So in short lighting, you can see it's dramatic. The amount of the lit side of the face is probably 1/3 or less compared to broad lighting. So you've given them a thinner aspect. Now this is extreme because we would want to bring in a second light to fill those shaded sides of the face. And the fill light will generally be low power. Often it's a larger modifier. My fill light is, I use a 6-foot or 5-foot modifier. It's low power, but it fills in a very wraparound kind of way for that lighting. It may or may not spill onto the background.
Would that be about 4:1?
Well, that's what I was going to say. So now we can consider the ratios. How bright do we want one side of the face to be compared to the other? And as you in this case, we've got, well, because we've got black on the broad image that I'm showing you, we've got black on one side. So we might measure gray levels and find it's like 10:1 or something like that.
Right.
So in the case that we want to introduce fill, we're looking so that we still see the detail. We want to see the eye. We want to see the side of the face. We might still like to see the jawline contrasted against the background, but we'd like to see something that is recognizable detail of the face. There may be the color of the eye, the eyelashes. On the short lighting, who knows what is key about the eye that we're showing there? Something that's very important about the eye that we're showing.
The focus must be directly on that eye.
Yeah, so focus is good. We like to see sharp eyes because that's, as a human, that's where we're going to look. We're probably going to look at the eyes. Also, they're bright here, so they're nicely contrasted. But there's something about the skin of the eye on the eyelid that is key. That is a question you may be asked on the exam.
Just that you have to see that as opposed to cutting off the eye?
Right, exactly. So one of the questions, I know even I had it on my test actually, was that if you've got someone and you see the either the main eye like this or the second eye and they're tilted away from the camera, it's key not to have the eyeball cut the edge of the face. They want to see a little tiny sliver of skin. So we do on that short lighting, the very left side of the eye that we can see the skin, just a tiny amount of it. If we cut the silhouette, if you like, if we cut that with the eyeball, that's considered, you might do it stylistically, intentionally, but most photographers would look at that and think that was an accident and it doesn't look as good. So we want to see the whole eye, in other words. So going back to the ratios, so let's see if we've got a ratio here. So on the, these two. So we've got a key light or a main light, and the softbox is close, right in the middle. And on the right side, it's got further away. And so going back to what we were talking about earlier, the closer the softbox gets, the light wraps around and it fills in the shadows. So with a single light in the center image here with the softbox, when it's close, you've got a lighting ratio. She's actually facing just slightly off center here, but you've got a lit side because that's where the key light is, and you've got a shaded side. But because the softbox is so close, we've created a ratio, maybe 2 to 1, or even less. That there might even be more close. But we've created the shading and the shape of the face with just one light. And that shadow on the left side of her face, it almost goes away. But we can see the left side of her face clearly lit, and it's filled in maybe half as intense or nearly that to the directly lit side where the soft box was. And also, if we look at the far away softbox, who can tell me about the shadows that have changed? What's changed when we've got a further when we move the softbox away? How about Nancy?
They're a lot softer. I'm sorry.
So when we move the softbox further away, what changes in these images?
Well, they're deeper. The shadows are a little bit deeper.
And by deeper, what do you mean?
Actually, they might not.
They look more
also-
contrasty.
They're more contrasty, yeah.
Right. So we've got more contrast in the shadows, and so they're a little darker because when the softbox is close, the softbox reflects light all around inside it, and it comes out in all different directions. So it's diffuse. That's part of its purpose. We want to diffuse the light. So some part of the light has gone on the shaded side of the face with the softbox when it's closer. And as you move the softbox away, we're getting eventually to a point source. The sun is a huge light, but it's so far away, it's almost a point source. So we get very, very sharp shadows. So halfway in between, we've got the close softbox wrapping around, and the distant softbox is now a smaller light source, and it creates stronger shadows, which are both darker or deeper, as Nancy was saying, and also they're sharper. So if we look between the left image and the right image on the bottom there, the close one has more diffuse shadows and the distant softbox has sharper shadows. So in general, we might want to have, well, let me ask it as a question. So when we want sharp shadows and when we want diffuse shadows, for instance?
Let's say sharper shadows when we're photographing males compared to females.
Yeah, it could be, or something that's Hollywood or acting or something. So for a headshot for an actor, they might prefer the sharper shadows because it gives strength and contrast and shape. But for a headshot or a portrait for a lady, we'd probably want the softer shadows.
Would we do one for like a sports portrait?
Yes, sports, you want action and strength and dynamic, and so you want definition of the muscles, and maybe you want the jawline to be harder, or the brow or other kinds of things to stand out.
Okay.
And when we were talking about ladies would perhaps like flat light because it reduces wrinkles. This one, for instance, here we've got loop light again. So in the center picture, you can see the loop under the right side of the nostril, but we've got more shading here, but they've added a rim light. That was the word I was looking for before when we were talking about the hair light. This is on the hair, but it's creating a rim.
Right.
Who can describe the rim effect that we're seeing? Somebody try and describe it.
It's a light that kind of frames your subject from behind.
Yeah, that's a great word.
That kind of separates them from the back.
Two great words. So framing. So in our composition, a frame helps like direct attention to what's inside the frame. So we've managed to highlight the right side of her shoulder, the side of her cheek, around the ear, and up on the hair. And so that's given us a frame or a boundary which shows that we want to look to the left side of it. And also you said separation. So instead of the subject just blurring with the background, so we can't see where subject stops and background starts, that rim light has given us great separation. So those are good. So this is much more of a dramatic portrait. If we compare the flat light above, that's could be much more beautiful and soft and feminine maybe, or delicate and more perfect. And then we look at the bottom one. She has a good complexion, so we aren't seeing many pores and wrinkles and other kinds of things. But if we use this light and it was someone that was older, we would use it intentionally to create that effect of age and weatheredness. So maybe that's the fisherman on the beach or something, where you've got this guy with a pipe and you want the weathered look to come through. So we will want to use more create shadows for that purpose. And here we've created interest because you're kind of looking now. There's more intrigue and drama in this particular picture. Okay, so high key. Who knows how to describe high key?
High key is basically blowing out the background so that everything's white behind you.
So if you were to look at a gray card and you wanted to do a white balance or whatever, what intensity would the gray card come out if you shot it? Just photographed and looked at your values in Adobe Camera Raw or wherever. What intensities would you end up with?
I would open up my lens 2 stops.
No, I'm not asking. I'm saying if you shot a gray card, what intensity would the image be that your camera would, your light meter and your camera light meter would help you expose to get? What, on the intensity scale from 0 to 255 in a histogram, where would the histogram peak if you looked at a gray card?
It's center 128, shouldn't it?
Correct. So in a high key image like this, on the right there, the average intensity will be moved to the right side because it's bright, brighter than a gray card. Your overall intensities of the background and the subject are often in the right-hand side, the bright side. And for low key, we would have them to the left. So that's one of the things where your meter can mislead you, whether it's a real light meter or the light meter in your camera with automatic exposure or whatever, aperture or program or shutter priority. Your camera is going to try and get your average intensity to be in the middle of your intensity range. And so they don't expose for high key. So a high key image like the one we're looking at, as Nancy had said, we've got a white background. It may or may not be blown out. And the subject is going to look brighter than before. So if we're adding extra light or we're allowing our exposure to gather more light on the sensor for a brighter picture, move that histogram up, and it's a style. And then we've got low key, which is drama. So if you've ever looked at a Rembrandt picture, I think we've got Rembrandt lighting here. I can't see, my camera's in the way. Here we go. So in this Rembrandt short lighting, we've probably moved the average intensity down because we've got such deep shadows. But that's not how we would do it. We would have to intentionally adjust our exposure so that we got maybe a very dark and moody background, and probably a lot of shading on the subject as well, so that the details that we wanted to highlight, the eyes, maybe the cheek, a little bit of lighting on the face, would come out and give us a more of a low key effect. So that's again part of your vocabulary, and using a gray card. The gray card is going to get an average of in your histogram. There we go. The gray card will give you an average intensity of around 127, 128, and then high key is when most of the exposures intensity is to the right, and low key is where it's to the left. And we can use that for drama. and a stylistic effect. So going back to Rembrandt, actually on the top left here, you'll see Rembrandt. So who can describe what the Rembrandt effect is that we're seeing?
The little triangle.
Right, so Rembrandt's style was very dark, but he would very often bring out, he'd have the light apparently coming from one side, cutting across the nose, and a little part of it, so the little part of the light would cut across the nose and hit the cheek and make this little triangle. And so that the nose where the light was shaded would give a dark shadow down the nose and a lot of shading on the cheek, and the side of the head would be, and the hair would all be shaded. And this to me brings out two things. It brings out the lit eye, the short side lit eye, because we've got a lot of light on it. And it also brings out the eye and the cheek here. The cheek's almost irrelevant. It's the eye that you want to be attracted to on that side. So there's a little bit of attention because your eye is drawn to the light, and that bit of attention helps you see the other eye as well. So now you're focusing on the person and their expression and intention. Yes, Nancy?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Okay, so the two Rembrandt effects here, we've got Rembrandt on the broad side. So we've lit with the nose facing to the camera left, we've lit the right side and it's full of light, but some light has escaped past the bridge of the nose and is lighting the short side cheek. It's not so triangular here. And then in the short lighting, we've lit the short side of the face, so a narrow, tall profile there that's lit, and the light has escaped into the right side of the image to hit the cheek, and a little bit better triangle there.
And both these Rembrandt, the light is pretty much level with the person's face.
Right, very good. So Ken has pointed that out, that the height of the light, if we rate, well, let me ask the question. So if, Charles, if we raise that light, what would happen?
You will have a shadow more on underneath her nose.
Right, so take a look under the chin. On the left side image, it's very nice that we've actually got light that's bouncing off her neck and bouncing off the front of her chest up to light under. That's a beautiful effect. So we've got that, we've almost got the rim light on her jaw. That's very nice. And if we raise the light, as Charles said, the light would now create more of a shadow underneath the neck, and any of the eye sockets and other things would have a downward facing shadow. So as Ken mentioned, the light is, we can tell the light is coming pretty horizontal. So we have all different things that we can do with the light. We can position it left of the camera, right of the camera. We can position it closer for softness or further for harshness. And we can position it up to direct which way the shadows go. And then when we add a second light, we're adding light. So we're taking away the contrast. So that's what our fill is going to do. And it's going to fill the portion of the face where we want to add light and make the ratio closer to 1:1. So if we're looking at this, the flat light. So Nancy, what is the ratio of light on the flat light image between the left and the right side of the face?
It's 1:1. Right.
And so here, Ken, what's the ratio that we're looking at with the softbox, the center image there?
Okay, I would say that's about 2:1, maybe 3:1, because there's a dark shadow on the cheek.
Right, as it fades, the ratio gets more, but the cheek to cheek is probably 2:1. And right. Then if we look at this one, through a brolly, I'm not going to discuss the brolly right now, but approximately what ratio do we get here, Charles? Between the left side, the left cheek and the right cheek, on average.
Which one are we referring to?
The Rembrandt through a brolly.
Oh, that's probably 8:1.
Probably not that much. So if we look at the split lighting, that's 8:1 or 10:1, and we probably
Okay.
stop even counting the ratios by the time there. We've got lit and shaded in the case of split lighting, so 8:1 is a big ratio. But in this case, the Rembrandt through a Brolly on average, and it does change because the top of a cheek is lit and the bottom is unlit. But the top of the cheek to the top of the cheek probably is 3:1, and so split lighting. If we look at that one, we're seeing we've stopped really counting ratios, and we've got light or no light, and that can be a dramatic effect. I mean, it's a portrait style if you want it. So split lighting is interesting because you've got light coming from one place, and it's kind of horizontal. So the
light is put by her shoulder on the light side.
All right. If you look at the plane of the sensor, right, we draw a line through the camera body. You can now see that the light has come the same distance away from the plane of the camera as the subject. So it's coming directly sideways on. And let me show you. Sorry, I'm looking for Badger. So here we've got the lighting from behind, and so you can see we've created shadows in front. So I want clamshell next. Let me find clamshell.
The bottom.
Here it is. Got it. So clamshell, we've got light coming up and light coming down. So we've removed the shadow from under the chin. So now you can see that by combining two lights, we can decide where the shadows exist, or do they go away. So on the right, the rim light, we've got one light coming towards her and one from behind. So that's created the rim effect, but the side of her face is still shaded. And then her nose is not pointing left or right, so it's not short or broad, but we have half of the light side on one side of the face, and it's nicely lit, and then strong shadows to the other side. And clamshell, we've got no shadows under the chin and no shadows in the sockets. We've filled in the eye sockets. We've got no butterfly, we've got no loop, and we've got lighting on both ears, very, very flat. There's a hint of shading. So if you looked in her eye, the eyeliner kind of thing going around, I can sense that's the eyelid is creating a little bit of a shadow maybe there. And if we go to the here's split lighting, that sideways lighting, split with a fill. So look at split. We've only lit one side of the face, split with a fill. Now we've got a ratio, and maybe that's a 3:1 ratio, where we've got light from one side, which is filling, so it's probably low power, and light from the other side, which is brighter, that's our main or key light. And so moving the lights around, one light you can do a lot, and then two lights you can do, you can add different effects. So I've rambled on and on and on. Chuck,
go ahead.
Chuck, can you add anything? Because I appreciate you being here, and I don't want to hog all the time.
The only thing I would add is if somebody wants to be able to see how the light changes with different lights, different intensity, all that, different modifiers, without having to go out and buy $500 million worth of equipment, there is some software. It's called Satellite 3D. It gives you three-dimensional models, and you can set up different lights. And as you move them, you can actually see how the light changes on that model. I think it runs about $80, but it's got a 2-week free trial. And I use it quite a bit just to play around and see how different lights will affect things.
Did you say Settle-Lite, S-E-T-T-L-E? I don't hear you.
Chuck, you're muted.
There. Okay, I'm going to put a link in the chat
Okay.
to where you can purchase it. There's a studio model and a basic model. I myself bought the basic model because I'm cheap. And I'm gonna pull it up on my screen, share my screen for a minute. Where to put it?
I still think in film and zone system, and that is handy if people are doing sRGB.
Now here, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
this is the model. And let me bring in a light. This is my main light. It's over here to the left, and you can see.
So wait, somebody tell us what lighting style that is.
Ron.
Could be Rembrandt also.
It's not broad, as a clue.
Okay.
It's not broad because the nose is pointing to the camera. So there is broad is where we've already turned the head so that there is a broad side of the head and a short side of the head. And here we have equal sides of the head.
It could be Rembrandt because right under her eye, you can see a little light off to the left side.
Yeah, it could be Rembrandt, but it's not really. And I appreciate you pointing that out, but that's not the primary lighting style.
Okay.
We were just looking at it a moment ago. Nancy?
Split?
Yeah, exactly. So we've got split lighting.
Okay.
So we're really hard
Yeah.
lit one side of the head and the other is pretty much in shadow. So I didn't mean to interrupt, Chuck.
That's okay. Actually, this goes along with, if you saw the question that Ann posted about, it's one from the practice, your main light set at 45 degrees, metered at f11. What do you set a fill light right behind the camera and how? I'm gonna turn off my main light for a minute and turn on a light right behind the camera. And this is actually one stop down from what the main light was.
So what style of lighting is that light?
I want to say flat, but that's not it. But
No, it is flat lighting. So we're basically directly lighting.
It's a
the
dark
subject.
flat.
And
Yes, it's a dark flat. It is flat because both sides of her face are lit
Equally lit.
the same. No difference.
and not just both sides, but we have no shadow under the nose,
Right.
right? So we're square on to the subject here.
Now, when I turn both lights on, now I have a ratio there. Because the two lights add together. The main light is only getting camera left of her face.
right.
The fill light's getting both sides. And when you turn them both on, they add together to give you
So
a
that'd be
ratio.
about 3-to-1.
Exactly. And that is one of the sample questions, and similar questions are on the test. They'll say if your main light is, for the sample question, is 45 degrees at f11, what do you need to set the fill light directly behind the camera to get a 3-to-1 ratio? And the answer for that would be f8, because it's one stop down, which is half the amount of power, which is what I've done here.
One of the ways that we calculate ratios. So first of all, I've had people that didn't understand that when we use strobes, the key is the lighting power, the amount of energy that your light is going to produce is what you adjust, but we still measure in f-stops when we look at the subject and use our light meter. So we measure in f-stops, but you don't change the f-stop on the camera. It's telling you the amount of light, the equivalent amount of light for that f-stop from the strobe. And so if you want to increase the light, if you, so at f8, for instance, we're less light than at f11. F11 means you could stop down to F11 and still get a gray card with 127 in the middle. And F8 means you'd have to open up to F8 to get a gray card in the middle, right? If you were F11 on that same light, you'd get your histogram being showing you were underexposed. So I find it that some people don't understand that what we're doing is we're measuring with an f-stop, but we're controlling the power on the light to change the amount of light. And so that here we've shown that the amount of light that you get at f11 is double the amount of light that you get at f8. So if you consider now, can you turn off the fill, Chuck, if you wouldn't mind? This is a great demo. So here, let's just say that we have two, the difference between f11 and f8 is 1 stop. So at f11, we've got twice the power, twice the light on the subject coming back to the camera. So that's taken away distance, it's taken away brand of light, it's taken away whatever you had to set that light to, whether it's 1 out of 10 or whether it's 1/256 or whatever, nobody cares. The amount of light hitting that face and coming back to the camera measured at f11 is, think of it as two units of light reaching the sensor. And now can you turn on the flash, sorry, the fill, and turn off the main? So we all thought this was dark. It's flat lighting, but it's dark. And that's because it's 1 stop less of light coming back to the camera. It's f8. So that means that on the right side of her face, she's getting 1 unit of light. And on the left side of her face, she's getting 1 unit of light from the fill. And now could you turn on both of them? So now we've added 2 units of light, because it's f11, to the lit side of the face and nothing to the fill side of the face. So that's how we get 3:1.
And let me just, while we're in here, let me just show you one other thing. I'm not going to move it closer, but the size of the light, now look at these shadows. They're fairly harsh. This is a 24-inch softbox that I've selected. I'm going to go
This is cheating.
to a giant. Now, look how much softer the shadows are.
Great.
Because the light is larger. Bigger the light, the softer the shadows. Smaller the light, the harsher they are.
And for Charles, you see we've got a little bit more area that's picking up that Rembrandt spill onto her cheek.
Now, the same thing would have happened with the 24-inch softbox if I just moved the light closer.
Right.
But either way, I get a bigger light. And, that's why the sun's shadows are so harsh. Even though it is a super bright light, especially on a cloudless day, it's really far away, which makes it appear small in relation to the subject.
So why do you need a big softbox? When would you need a big softbox?
I'd say when you've got a small group that you need to light evenly.
Right, you're on the right track. Anyone else? When would you want a bigger softbox than a smaller softbox? Think of this exact scenario.
You just want the softest light, whatever you want.
Well, kind of, but it's not where I'm going. Another factor that we often in our lighting, there's a whole list of different factors. And I'm looking for one specific problem that would happen if you wanted softer light and you had a 24-inch softbox. When would you need a bigger softbox?
The size of the studio, if it was smaller?
Not so much the size of the studio, but it's the size of the subject. So here we're looking with a 24-inch softbox, we're doing a headshot, right? Neck and above. But if we wanted to get our feet as well, then a 24-inch softbox would give us soft shadows on the face, but it wouldn't illuminate the feet, right? So we can pull it back and it can illuminate a larger area, but now it's a smaller light source further away, which gives us harsher shadows. So that's the time when you will want to have a bigger softbox so that you could have it closer and get from top to bottom of the subject. And as Ken said, if you've got a group, now you're talking bigger and bigger, or as Philip said, if the studio gets bigger and you've got them spread out, then you're going to need, if you want softer shadows, you need a larger softbox for that purpose.
That's a pretty long program.
It is.
Let me move this to where we can see.
So just as a by the way, because I don't like encouraging people to spend money, even though sometimes it's well worth it, I put a link in the chat to a non-PPA authorized source, which included the lighting setups I was using to demonstrate. So if you click on that, that'll give you an article which describes what I was talking about today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Now, if you look here, this is the 24-inch softbox, and you can see her whole body here.
But you've got hard shadows.
Yes, I got very hard shadows. Now, if I change it to that 59-inch, the shadows are a lot noticeably softer.
Okay.
And like I said, you can, this is software that has a 2-week free trial.
So who can tell me something that you can use when you don't have a big softbox?
A reflector.
Great.
What kind of umbrella?
Sorry, Charles?
Umbrella.
An umbrella. So yeah, so I'm looking for things that might be just there that you don't have to buy or bring, especially in this studio.
A large wall that you reflect the light off of.
There we go. So if we turn that softbox around, if we take the 24-inch and we turn it around and face it towards the wall. And now really boost the power. You're going to want to pump up the power. So actually this studio isn't ideal for the front, but it is ideal for the back. So if we wanted to get a slight rim or something, we could, so in my studio, for instance, I can shoot into the top corner behind the camera, not behind the subject, and I can get light reflected, which can create that kind of a fill. So a reflector, like, I don't know if any of you use V flats, which are basically large, portable cardboard or something like that. Sometimes they're white on one side and black on the other, so that you can use it to soak up light and to prevent reflection, or you can use it to add light and create reflection. And sometimes I'll use an 8-foot V flat unfolded with white behind me and put the light into that, and that creates the biggest umbrella than I could ever find or use. Or sometimes I'll put it into the corner of the room, and that will create other kinds of light. So, and you already probably do this, because if you've ever used an on-camera flash and you've used the bounce feature where you point the light behind you, that's going to you're hoping that's going to bring some very diffuse light and illuminate more than just your subject.
One other thing you could always do if you need a bigger light but you don't have a giant softbox, get a white bed sheet, put it on a stand between the light and the subject. That makes a huge diffuser. So
I like the idea that we can use all kinds of household objects for improvisation. Yeah, you have to be a problem solver as a photographer. And actually that's part, what we're doing today is part of what I believe the CPP exam and the CPP image evaluation bring to you, so that whether or not you knew it, I mean, some people take the CPP and they've been photographers for a long time and they know nearly all of it. Sometimes they find there's a gap in their knowledge because they specialized in one thing and didn't do another, so they don't know the vocabulary or techniques. But because you go through the range of photography skills and techniques and equipment, etc., in your as you're studying, what happens is that you get better prepared so that when you're in the field and you're exposed to a new situation, or something breaks and it doesn't work anymore, or they say, oh, not the place where you scouted, we don't want to do it there anymore, we want to do it in this place where it's horrible, but they want it, you know, that's their background, the set that they want. And now you have to think, how am I going to deal with that? Maybe it's a deep, dark hole, and you can like the subjects, but the background now looks black. So as an example, Chuck mentioned it, what would you do if you end up and you've got a very dark background and you've got one light? How would you get over that? How would you get a background that is as bright as you would like? We'll ask Nancy that question.
Bring a sheet with me.
Well, okay, no sheet. This is a how can you adjust the camera so that you would. I'm sorry.
Adjust the camera. Okay.
Yeah, you're there. They decided instead of the field, they want to take the picture inside this cave because it's got some nice features in the rocks in it.
Or
You
against
set
the
your one
shade
light up,
on.
but you can't see any of the features. So now what do?
You open up the f-stop and slow down your shutter.
Right, so you can add more light by a longer exposure. So one of the things that we do when we're shooting with strobes and speed lights is that we often have an exposure where the light, if the light was off, that would be dark or you know, super underexposed, because you're adding all of the light. So in that case, we would add some of the light ourselves, but we'd also rely on the ambient light. And by having a longer exposure, you can bring up the ambient light so the background would start to be more apparent. Or as you may or may not want to adjust the aperture. Perhaps that's the only thing you can do in your exposure triangle. Or maybe you can open up, what would be another way that we could increase sensitivity?
ISO.
ISO, right.
Yeah.
But ISO brings in what?
Noise.
Noise, right. So on our triangle, if we don't want a noisy image, so we don't want to increase the ISO, and we have an aperture where we want a particular depth of field, right? So that we've got bokeh or whatever, you know, we want attention to the faces, or maybe we want to get depth of field where we include the back of a group, and we can't change the aperture without affecting that. Right, so if we opened up the app, let me ask this as a question. So if we have a group and we need F11 to get focus from the front of the group to the back of the group, and we wanted to increase our overall intensity of our exposure, and we increase the aperture opening from F11 to just say F4, what would happen to our group focus?
It will blur
Your depth of field.
Yeah, the depth of field is blurred for the
Right,
people
so
in the
we
back.
would lose focus in some part of between the back and the front of the group. Wherever we put the focus point, we would then have a limited depth of field, and you might get the back row in focus, or just the middle row or the front row, and other people will be out of focus. So that would mean that we couldn't change our aperture without affecting the image. So then the only thing we've got left in our exposure triangle is what?
ISO or shutter speed.
Shutter speed. Right, so the ISO makes us noisy, the f-stop makes us blurry, so now we've got the shutter speed. So that means we can have a longer exposure, but then we need to do what?
Put it on a tripod.
Well, on a tripod is good, and that stops camera shake from us, but what else will we may have to do?
Well, our subjects remain still.
That's right. Everybody don't move.
Yeah, okay.
Got it. And
the other thing you have to keep in mind is when you're using a strobe, or the shutter, when you're using a strobe, the shutter speed has virtually no effect on the strobe light.
Why is that? Can somebody tell us why is that, Nancy?
The shutter speed has no effect on what?
On the strobe.
Your flash.
On the
shutter speed doesn't affect our exposure. Why is that?
The flash duration is short.
Yeah, I know you know the answer, Ken, but right. So yeah, the flash. How long is the flash duration when we have a speed light or we have a strobe light? How long does the light output last?
Milliseconds.
Probably 1/1000th of a second.
Oh, more than, shorter than that. It's like 1/10,000th or 1/20,000th on some strobes.
Yeah.
Right. So what happens inside a flash is that you have a coil, a capacitor, and you charge it up like you do your cell phone battery. You push all the power into it, and the capacitor will then release all that, and whether it's an arc or whatever it's going to do, like the filament, all that light comes out in a very tiny fraction of a second. But your shutter has to wait until it's fully open before you expose, and then the shutter will close, right? So when we have a fast shutter speed, like 1/2,000, the shutter opens like that, right? So it's such a tiny shutter speed that the mechanical shutter will move a window down the sensor or the film to expose. So there's something called the sync speed of your camera, and that's where the shutter starts to open. And when it's fully open, we blast that flash so that the entire sensor or film gets light, and then we close it. So that's in normal, that's called the sync speed of your camera, the maximum sync speed. So if it's, say, 1/60th of a second, it opens and the flash goes and it stays open for a little and then it closes.
Oh.
If it's 1/125, it's a little faster, but there's still a 1/25th of a second where the entire exposure is open. If it's
Unless it's a leaf shutter.
Right.
A leaf shutter can sync at any speed because it's a diaphragm that opens.
Yeah, okay, well, let's not get distracted yet, because this is already difficult to understand. So in your camera, in the manual, and maybe even in the dials, when you turn flash, you tell it you're going to use flash, your camera will have a maximum shutter speed or a minimum exposure, and that's sometimes 1/320 or 1/200 or 1/250. It depends on the type of shutter, as Ken said, but also on the brand, your specifics of your equipment. But basically that is the shortest time that it can be open for the flash before some portion of the sensor is covered, either at the beginning or at the end, right? So that's the time, 1/320 on my camera, for instance. That's the fastest, that's the sync speed, which is the shortest exposure where the entire sensor gets exposed with the flash, because the flash is over in a flash and it lights the whole scene. So on your camera, you should know that, because you would never take a flash photograph with a faster shutter speed. Otherwise, some portion of the sensor is covered by the shutter when your flash goes off, and you'll get a band. So you can identify in your photograph, if you've ever got a photograph where there's a dark band on the bottom or the top, wherever it might be, according to your shutter direction, that's because you've got a shorter exposure, a faster shutter speed than the sync speed. And the sync means I'm in sync with my flash. Right? So then there's high speed sync. Does anyone use high speed sync?
Yes.
So Charles, could you explain how high speed sync works so that you can get an exposure of 1/8000th of a second or 1/2000th of a second faster than the sync speed? Do you know how that works?
I will try to explain. Like if you have a really bright day out and you want to drop the ambient light, you will increase your shutter speed up as high as you need to for whatever effect you're trying to get. And what that does is, in the camera, it allows you to go above your sync speed of your camera, which is usually around 1/60th to 2/50th. So you can take it up as high as you need to go for whatever look you're trying to get out of your portrait or whatever.
That's all absolutely correct. But how does it do it?
It leaves the flash on for a longer period of time so the entire sensor is exposed.
I think it pulses.
Ah, good. So what happens is that we already know that we can't shoot the flash off when only a portion of this. So in my field of view, this is my sensor, right? And so if my shutter is now open this much and I shot my flash, I'd get a band on the bottom that would be dark. And in an exposure at our sync speed, the whole sensor is open and then I shoot the flash. And in a faster than sync speed exposure, I've got this kind of effect, so that there's only a small portion of the sensor which is open. So that would seem to be a problem that we can't solve with a flash, because only some portion gets illuminated at a time. But what the manufacturers have created, and it requires your flash and your camera and your shutter speed to be set to high speed, three things. It opens the shutter a little and flashes a pulse of light. It stops the flash, so it's not, as Ken was implying, a continuous flash. It's, as Nancy was implying, a pulsed flash. So this is the first pulse, then it turns the flash off. This is the second pulse now, and it turns the flash off. And this is the nth pulse. It'll do however many it needs to. So it's illuminating a band of your sensor with each pulse until somehow miraculously they all match, right? So it's carefully calibrated how much light and exactly how much of the shutter is open. They're precisely calibrated so that the overall exposure has taken 1/2000th of a second, and it's had 8 or 24 pulses or whatever the number is. I don't really care, but each portion of the sensor has been illuminated by the same amount of light in that very short amount of time.
Yeah, like John was saying earlier, normal flash, it charges up the capacitor and you hit the flash, boom, the capacitor's gone and it makes a light flash. In a high-speed sync, there's a series of capacitors and they each dump one at a time in series, but it happens so fast. As far as we're concerned, it's just one long continuous flash. But in reality, it's a bunch of very short flashes all strung together. So for us, it looks like one long flash, but it's not. I've actually have a example picture that demonstrates how shutter speed is not affected by the flash. And let me pull that up. That's this picture right here.
You can open your shutter, or you can have a 2-second exposure with a flash, and if nothing moves, there's no ghost image. Sometimes if there are people in it, you might get a little bit of a ghost image if people move.
Yeah. This particular picture was taken in a dark room. It's a water balloon popping. The shutter speed was at 5 seconds.
Wow. Okay.
It was a 5-second shutter speed, but the only time anything got to the sensor was when the flash went off. When the flash went off, it hit the balloon as it was popping and the camera captured it. But the shutter speed was at 5 seconds on that. So this kind of demonstrates shutter speed has almost no effect on the flash, but it greatly affects your ambient light. So that's why when you've got you're inside the cave, you can't see the details of the cave, but you got your light lighting up the people. If you slow your shutter speed, the people are still going to look fine, but now you've increased the amount of ambient light that can get into your sensor, and now you can see more of the background.
So Chuck's image could have been at 5 seconds, or it could have been at 1/2000, and we would have seen exactly the same exposure.
Well, now with the flash I had, since it wasn't a high-speed flash, high-speed sync, there would have been a band somewhere if I had had a super high shutter speed.
So going back to what Charles said, he explained very well when you would need it. So that's because your flash is going to illuminate your subject and you're going to get a correct exposure at 1/320 or 1/200 or 1/125. But as Chuck was just saying, the ambient light, the background light of your scene is still exposing during that time. And if you have a very bright day, a very bright background, then you don't want the ambient light to overpower your subject. So you control the ambient light with the shutter speed, but you control the subject exposure with the flash power. So you have to think in both directions. And when your shutter speed needs to be faster than the sync speed of your camera, you can't control it with shutter speed anymore, because you're going to get a band unless you use the high speed sync technique. So that's really where, if you think I can't get my ambient to be low enough power. So actually a lot of time when you shoot outdoors, you would expose for the ambient. So that sets your shutter speed. And now you can start doing the flash for your subject and the background. So you've got a couple on a beach and it's a sunset, you expose for the sunset, and then you add the power of your flash so that you light the subject until they go from shaded into properly exposed.
Yeah. Something else to consider is the accuracy of your shutter speeds. It was very important on film because the standard was you were in tolerance plus or minus 1 f-stop on the shutter speed. So 1/60th second could be either 1/30th of the second or 1/125th of the second and be in tolerance.
I'm pretty sure we've got more higher tolerance today, but yes,
Yeah.
that's still the thing. Actually, we use some traditional things in photography. So the idea of using 1/30th of a second, that's typically not a real stop. So we have 1 second, a half a second, a quarter of a second, a 16th of a second, so the 1/30th is not any of those increments. It's an approximation.
Right.
So 130 and 160 might be a stop apart, but 1/125, well, it will be 1/120.
Right.
Right, and it'd be 1/240, not 1/250. So we've got some tradition which has leaked into our ideas, and so whether it really is 1/125 or whether it's actually 1/120, that's dependent on the manufacturer, and as Ken said, there could be some variation in tolerance. Okay, well, it's 10:30 now, so we went way over. But I got the feeling it was useful. Is that the case?
Oh, John, this was so helpful. Thank you so much. It was just perfect timing for me too.
Yeah, very good.
I'm just
that was very, very good. I need to study now all the lighting techniques, but what I do 98% of the time is objects that are freight damaged at a location. And so basically it's 1, maybe 2 speed lights to light it, or ambient light.
Very good. So we didn't hear from Christy. Christy, are you there? Doesn't sound like it. Okay. Well, anyway, you're welcome in any case. If you can hear us and don't want to speak, that's fine. So welcome to everyone that came this week, and same time, same place next week. It may or may not be me that's here, but I believe and I hope that these sessions are useful, but it really is driven by you. So if you have questions, they're the ones that we'd like to answer rather than make this, just a more general education.
This was excellent. Thank you.
Yeah,
Hi,
really
everybody.
great
Thank you, John. Yeah, thank you, John.
Bye.
Thank you, John.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Chuck, because that software that you
I learned so
demonstrated,
much.
yeah, that software, I wrote it down, Satellite 3D, that was amazing.
Yeah, I have fun with it, playing with it. I like software and different gadgets.
Okay, very good.
Bye.
Okay,
We'll see
bye,
everybody.
everybody.